afternoon, ma'am. This is D. Spooty from Hunter House. We Hunter House are going to present you a model about embryonic development of respiratory system. First, let's talk about respiratory system in general. Respiratory system is a vital system which involves an exchange of gases. This supplies oxygen, which is important for our metabolism. It consists of two parts, a conducting part and a respiratory part. The conducting part consists of nostrils, nasal chamber, nasopharynx, larynx, trachea, different type of bronchi and terminal bronchioles. The respiratory part consists of respiratory bronchioles, alveoli and alveolar ducts. Now coming to today's topic, embryonic development of respiratory system. This starts at about fourth week of intrauterine life. First, there is a ventral outgrowth in the cranial part of esophagus which forms respiratory diverticulum, which is also known as laryngotracheal diverticulum. This diverticulum has two parts, the cranial part and caudal part. The cranial part develops into larynx, whereas the caudal part develops into trachea. The lowermost part of this diverticulum forms a bifid to form bronchial buds or lung buds. Now, there are two lateral folds that form. These folds are also known as tracheoesophageal folds. These folds fuse together to form tracheoesophageal septum. This septum again has cranial part and caudal part. The caudal part separates the trachea and esophagus so that the trachea is formed ventrally and the esophagus is present dorsally. The cranial part of this septum is involved in larynx. Now the further presentation will be continued by Sai Ganesh.
The entire diverticulum is surrounded by a splanchnic mesenchyme that forms all the mesodermal derivatives called muscle and the cartilage. The upper part of the diverticulum was contributing to the trachea and larynx. Let us discuss the larynx in two parts, the inlet and the interior surface of the lungs. The inlet forms as a slit from the cranial part of the septum. This is also called as furcula of His, whereas interior part of the lungs has two components, that is epithelium and muscle and the cartilage. Epithelium forms from the endoderm of the foregut, whereas the muscle and cartilage forms from the fourth and sixth pharyngeal arches that surrounding the septum. Next part will be continued by the Monish.
Before going to the further topic, let's talk about the respiratory tree. Respiratory tree consists of trachea, primary bronchi, secondary bronchi. Secondary bronchi is also called as lobar bronchi because it supplies to the lobes of the lungs. Lungs are divided into lobes by having fissures on it. The right lung has 3 lobes and the left lung has 2 lobes. The secondary bronchi is further divided into tertiary bronchi. Tertiary bronchi is also called as segmental bronchi. It supplies to the segments of the lobules of the lungs. The tertiary bronchi is further divided into terminal bronchiole. Terminal bronchiole has single lining epithelium and surrounded by the mesenchyme, which gives rise to the connective tissue. This connective tissue also contains the formation of blood capillaries, and so it more look like a gland. Hence, this stage is called a pseudoglandular stage. It extends from the 6th to 16th week of intrauterine life. The duct is developed into the alveolar sac. The alveolar sac is lined by an epithelium. The epithelium has two types, type 1 cells and type 2 cells. The epithelium which is differentiated forms type 1 cells. The epithelium which is not differentiated forms type 2 cells. Type 1 cells lining the alveolar sac is useful for the gaseous exchange, and type 2 cells releases phospholipid substance called surfactant. This surfactant decreases the surface tension formed when an air is flown into the alveolar sac. There will be a formation of a fluid air interface which increases the surface tension. This phospholipid which is lining the alveolar sac decreases that surface tension. This is the main role of type 2 cells. And see, there is a one stage called alveolar sac stage. In this stage, the proliferation and maturation of alveolar sac happens. This happens from the birth to the 8 years of the child.
Discuss some important anomalies which occur during embryonic development of respiratory system. Respiratory distress syndrome, which is also known as hyaline membrane disease. This is primarily seen in premature babies whose lungs are not fully developed. This causes decreases surfactant production. This is prenatally treated by giving glucocorticoids to the mother, and postnatally it is treated by giving artificial surfactants to the premature baby.
Tracheoesophageal fistula. It is an abnormal connection between trachea and esophagus. This condition is often congenital, which means it happens during fetal development. Tracheoesophageal fistula often happens with another birth defect, esophageal atrasia. In this condition, esophagus of baby is not developed properly. Esophagus forms two parts instead of one, and these two parts are not connected to each other, which affects the digestion of fluids in the baby.
Okay, and into lungs. The lungs expand and the intercostal muscles also contract. The diaphragm contracts and flattens, increasing the thoracic volume and hence the thoracic pressure. Now, next, the diaphragm forms dome shape by relaxing. The intercostal muscles relax and the thoracic volume decreases, increasing the intrathoracic pressure, and hence the air is expelled out again via bronchi, trachea, larynx, and nasal chamber. About embryonic development of respiratory system by Hunter House. Thank you, ma'am.